And millennials locked out of home ownership and living at home at 30. The wake-up call on the great Australian dream.
I don't mean to be negative, but I think the living at home at 30 is going to turn into living at home at 40. If people don't wake up and realize that you really don't have to buy a home to live where you want to live. I used to work with a woman who used to say, it's really a shame that she had a partner, we can't afford to live in Utah Bay. And I said, I'm pretty sure you live in Utah Bay. She goes, yeah, I live in Utah Bay. I'm renting, but I can't afford to buy. And I said, no, but so how long you lived in Utah Bay for? And she's like, 10 years. I said, so you can afford to live in Utah Bay. You have been able to afford to live in Utah Bay in Sydney here. She's like, yeah, well, I suppose when you put it that way, that is true. So this madness that you have to buy, I know you make it your own. You can drill a hole and hang a picture anywhere you want. You don't have to ask the landlord, and there's no chance that a landlord will all of a sudden call your real estate agent and say, look, you have to move out because landlord's got some other plans to sell it or do other things with it. Fair enough, but that doesn't happen all that often. Plus, moving home and the harshness and difficulties of moving home are overrated, in my opinion. It's actually easy. Two men in a truck, it costs hundreds, maybe $1,000 or more dollars, but you know what? The amount of money that you're saving for not buying, not all the expenses, especially for units and strata, body corporate fees, you more than compensated for that chance that you may have to move because of the changes in your landlord's plans, which again, if you're a good tenant, they normally wouldn't have any reason to make any changes. So you may end up living there for years, if not decade, if you need to. There's nothing wrong with that. Back in the day when it was easy, back in the 50s, 60s, when it was actually much easier to own a home and you were renting, then I suppose you could say, why are you renting? What's the problem? Why do you have to rent in the 50s, 60s, even 70s and beyond when it's pretty easy to buy a home if you have any sort of job, which is not the case now. So what I'm saying is that the old fallacies that you have to own a home in 2019 are not there anymore. I remember my first job in the city, 2006, and I was a single man. I still am. And I'd go out with workmates after work, the famous Thursday, Friday nights after work, and we'd get on the good old beers. And I would meet a lot of people, mostly ladies. Uh, I'm not bragging, I'm just saying I would meet actually, guys and talk to all sorts of people, and they would be from all around the world. There would be tourists, backpackers, visitors, and they would ask me where I lived. And at the time, I lived in southwestern Sydney, and as much as that can work for most people, they used to say, okay, so where is this? And I'd say, it's around Parramatta, and they'd say, well, that's far away. Why do you live there? And I thought to myself, I have a pretty good job. Why do I live there? To save a couple of bucks? It's not worth it. And you know what? Needless to say, 12 months after that, I ended up moving out and I went to live at Woolloomooloo. I didn't even feel paying a little bit more than what I used to and having a little bit less space and not having parking for my visitors. You kind of adjust and then you just love it. What came out of it is that I realized that there's not really that much space here, and I'm better off just selling the car and maybe buying a motorbike. And that's exactly what I did. So I had a motorbike for 10 years after that. The really good thing came out of it, and I loved it. And I walked to work. Took me 20 minutes to walk across the Domain Park via Martin Place and getting to Kent Street, all up 20 minutes walk. Good for you. Saving on transport, time, carbon emissions. See, I was ahead of the time. I was carbon neutral. I'll talk myself into believing that carbon dioxide is actually a pollutive or pollutant substance. Something that we, by the way, exhale every time we take the breath in, breathe out carbon dioxide. We are polluting this planet, really. If you can't see where they're going with it, pull your head out of the sand. Gee, I digressed, didn't I?
And millennials locked out of home ownership and living at home at 30. The wake-up call on the great Australian dream. Like the gulf between the executive suite and the shop floor, home ownership in Australia has very much become a tale of the haves and the have-nots. While many baby boomers are paying off their mortgages, about a third of millennials believe they'll be living at home with mum and dad into their 30s. A new report from CoreLogic says first home buyers are locked out or struggling with an unholy trinity: saving a 20% deposit, which takes an average of 11 years in Sydney, clearing much higher loan hurdles in the wake of the Banking Royal Commission, and coming up with stamp duty, on average 3% of the purchase price.
That is your real main obstacles there, really, when you think about it. I mean, look at it. It takes average of 11 years. I didn't know this. Average of a millennial needs average of 11 years to save up for 20% of the worth of the house. So $1 million, I always go with this $1 million in Sydney. So $200,000 takes you 11 years, and you still have to borrow $800,000 and pay it off with interest. I mean, I think that'll take not 30 years all up, so 11 years to save, 30 years to pay it off. So it's like 41 years until you own a 76 square piece of dirt somewhere in inner west or inner city in Sydney. I don't think it's worth it. And then it's higher to get that $800,000, which I still think, honestly, banks don't have a problem with lending you that much money. On average, you should be able to scrape through together with the bank of mum and dad, right? A lot of people don't put that down on the application. They just say, "Hey, I've got deposit in $200,000," but they didn't really save it. They probably got 50 or $100,000 from both of the parents' sides. And then stamp duty average is 3%. That is average. I think that some of the better properties end up being about 3.5, 4%, if not 4.5. There is a calculator. We had that house that sold down the road here at Neutral Bay for $5,055,000, I think, and the stamp duty from memory was $294,000. $294,000 just stamp duty, granted on a $5 million house, yes, but that's an insane amount of money.
While the RBA has flagged yet another rate cut to under 1% next week, Australian prices are still among the highest in the world. In Europe, the proportion of home ownership is much lower than here in Australia. But the CEO of CoreLogic International says while it's getting tougher to buy a house, 4 out of 5 Australians still believe it's important to own your own home.
Look, don't get me wrong, it is important to own your own home, but not at any cost. It is important. I think it's important to own your own home. But if it means having to forego on a reasonable amount of holidays at reasonable destinations like Gold Coast, not overseas, and not having to save on essentials, sure, go ahead. But we know that for an average person with an average pay in Sydney or couple, as we saw from my previous video and the business report, it's actually not possible. So just walk away from it. Live your life, because cliche here, warning, you only live once. And it's not just that you only live once to, if you're lucky, an age of 80, 90 or more, um, you're only young once. Once you go over the age of 50, yes, life becomes more comfortable, hopefully, for other things, but 50, 60, 70, you're not young anymore. You're living, and hopefully a good life, hopefully a good quality life, but it's closer to the end than it is to the day you were born, if you know what I mean.
I spoke to Lisa Klaas earlier.
This next segment, just quickly, I didn't see a very much value to share it with you, but I'll just give you a first segment of it.
Lisa, we've just come out of a big downturn in the housing market. Why hasn't it lowered?
I love it though. We've just come out of the big downturn, 10, 15% all up on average kind of. That's not a big downturn compared to what I expect to see. My prediction still is. And I think the year, I know it's convenient, it's 2019 now, it's 30th of September 2019 today, and it's very convenient for me to be calling 2020 as the year when the Australian real estate finally cracks. But I am calling it 2020 all up, the losses peak to trough will be 40% at least. So once again, quick segment here.
Lisa, we've just come out of a big downturn in the housing market. Why hasn't it lowered affordability for a lot of people?
If I look at our key affordability metric, which is dwelling price to household income, that's 6.5 times. So the dwelling value is 6.5 times more, the gross, not net, household income, and that is, 20 years ago, it's 50% higher than it was there. So that being our key metric of affordability just shows you that that's quite a staggering ratio to maintain. Deposits, 9.
Staggering ratio to maintain, which means that one is going to have to give. So what she's talking about is the ratio between the income and the prices of property. Now, we know that in this globalized world, it's a race to the bottom, which means that instead of getting the third world countries up to the level of the first world countries as far as the wages, what they've done is that they've bringing the wages of the first world countries more closer to, in real terms, adjusting for inflation, closer to the wages of the third world countries, meaning that what I'm getting at is that one of those has to give. So I don't think it'll be the wages rising to catch up with the prices or increase in prices of dwellings. I think it'll be the prices of dwellings that will come down to meet the actual income in Australia. Another thing going towards it is that if we are one of the most or second most expensive real estate market in the world, beyond or behind Hong Kong, I think in any case we're in like top three or top five. I mean, in this globalized world, the people coming from abroad are relatively looking at Australia, the value of Australia. We've got the beaches and the sun, and a bit of an industry, or at least some sort of financial and construction for now, and maybe IT and services in Sydney and Melbourne, maybe Brisbane, and again mining in Perth, but the rest of the country, unfortunately, there really hasn't got that much going for it. So it'll be the real estate levels coming down to meet the wages instead of wages going up, unfortunately, to meet the prices of homes. Hence, my prediction 2020, all up, peak to trough 40%. And as much as they tell us that wouldn't be good news for everyone, that is excellent news for everyone. Even if you own a lot of properties, I think that's not a bad news, because if you still have the income, you'll be able to buy even more and to add to your portfolio if that's what you like to do, collect properties in your life. Speaking of which, very, very few people actually end up selling those properties. I've got an uncle who's passed away a few years now, but he's got a son, and they've got like 6 properties, right? And he never sold any. He never realized that cash. He never used that cash to go on holidays or even just improve his quality of life a little bit. So he's passed away. He's left it to his son and my cousin, right? And he's still holding on to them. And he said, "Look, I'd rather not be holding on to them, but because all but one that he's living in are investments, he says if I sell it, and because of such a great, phenomenal capital appreciation, I'm going to have to pay capital gains tax, which will be hundreds of thousands of dollars per property." And he just says, "Look, I'm not prepared to do that, so I'm just going to keep holding." So my point is that even when you buy all these properties extra to the one you're living in, especially the one you're living in, you're really not going to sell it. And even if you do, what do you do with the money? You go somewhere else to buy it, and everything else has gone up. Unless you're going to buy somewhere like, I don't know, Thailand or Philippines or some other country where the property prices haven't actually gone up that much, or some parts of Australia which are not necessarily desirable, and or there's really no work there, so you can just go there and retire, and with half of the value of the property that you had in Sydney, Melbourne, have half in the bank and just kind of use it up and spend it until you're not on this world anymore. So young people aspiring to get onto that property ladder don't need to. I mean, the life is already very good. Just get a job, find someone you like, go get married, have kids, and you'll be happy. I know I've carried on a little bit this time, but apologies. Maybe video is a little bit too long for what I normally put out, but here it is. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll speak again next time. Take care.